The old Miller place sat at the end of Cypress Lane like a bad tooth in a dying gum. The town, the kind of place where everyone knew your grandfather's middle name, had a single, unspoken rule. You didn't talk about the Miller place, and you sure as hell never went near it. Kids on bikes would pedal furiously past it, their laughter dying in their throats as they neared the property line, as if the very air around it was jealous of joy. The adults would just shake their heads, a shadow passing behind their eyes, and change the subject to the weather or high school football. The house itself was a grand dame of Victorian architecture, but time and sorrow had worked on her like a disease. The paint, once a proud white with dove-gray trim, had blistered away to a leprous gray. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle, a tired sigh made of wood and nail. Gables thrust sharply against the skyline, their windows like sightless eyes. Some boarded up, others just dark and empty. A single third-story circular window, set in the peak of the main turret, watched over the street, a malevolent cyclops. The story, the one everyone knew but no one told, was about the Millers. Elias Miller, a clockmaker of some renown, had built the house with his own hands for his wife Eleanor and their young son Samuel. They were happy, the story goes, until the fire, a faulty wire in the nursery, they said. Elias was in his workshop in the basement, consumed by a new intricate design for a musical ballerina for a mantel clock. Eleanor was in the garden, cutting roses. No one saw the first tendrils of smoke until it was too late. Little Samuel never made it out. Eleanor, shattered by grief, walked into the river 3 months later. Elias never left. He boarded up the house room by room, sealing the memory inside. He became a ghost himself, a gaunt, silent figure occasionally seen in the town square buying tinned food and clock parts, his eyes hollow sockets. He died in that house, they said, and the house, having consumed its family, simply sat and waited for more. This was the story that brought Leo to this dead-end town. Leo was a content creator, a title that felt both incredibly modern and utterly meaningless as he stood, looking up at the oppressive silhouette of the Miller house. His channel, Urban Decay Diaries, specialized in exploring abandoned places. He'd done asylums, factories, schools. This house, with its potent local legend, was his white whale. His camera, a heavy professional rig, felt like a shield in his hands. His companion, however, looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Maya was a local history buff he'd connected with online, a college student with a keen mind and a healthy dose of skepticism. "You know this is a profoundly stupid idea, right?" she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The afternoon sun was already beginning to die, stretching the house's shadow toward them like a long, grasping finger. "The best ideas always are," Leo said, adjusting his camera settings. "The legend, the tragedy, the haunting, this is gold, Maya, pure gold. People eat this stuff up. They also get tetanus and fall through rotten floorboards," she countered. But she followed him as he pushed open the rusted iron gate. It screamed in protest, a sound that was far too on the nose for Leo's liking. He made a mental note to use it in the edit. The front door was massive oak, scarred and weather-beaten. It was locked, of course, but one of the lower floor windows, its glass long gone, offered easy access. Leo boosted Maya up and then handed her his gear before climbing through himself. They landed in what must have been the parlor. The air inside was thick and cold, a stale chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. It smelled of dust, dry rot, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old coins, and sweet like spoiled milk. The silence was absolute. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence, a heavy blanket that smothered any noise they made. Leo switched on his powerful flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. Dust motes danced in the light like frantic spirits. The room was frozen in time. A high-backed sofa was shrouded in a white sheet, now gray with decades of dust. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, its face cracked. Its hands forever stopped at 3:17. Portraits hung crooked on the walls, the subjects' features blurred and darkened by grime, their eyes seeming to follow the beam of light. "Elias Miller was a clockmaker," Maya whispered, her skepticism seeming to evaporate in the oppressive atmosphere. Her voice was swallowed by the room. "He made all his own timepieces. They say he was a genius." Leo panned his camera slowly. "This is incredible. It's like a museum." He moved into the hallway. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but not with the random groans of an old house. These creaks sounded deliberate, sequential, like footsteps following just behind his own. He'd stop, and the creaking would stop a half-second later. He wrote it off as an echo. Maya lingered in the parlor, examining a small side table. On it sat a tiny, exquisitely crafted music box. Despite the layers of dust, the mother-of-pearl inlay still caught the light. Driven by an impulse she couldn't explain, she reached out and gently lifted the lid. A tiny, tinkling melody began to play. It was thin and distorted, the notes slightly off-key, as if the tiny metal comb was rusted. It played a lullaby, sweet and sad. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." From deep within the house, a floorboard groaned. Loudly. Not a settling groan, but the sound of weight being applied. Maya snapped the lid shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Leo!" she called out, her voice trembling. "In here!" His voice echoed from a room down the hall. "I think it's the study. You gotta see this!" She found him in a room lined with empty bookshelves. A massive desk dominated the space, and on it, laid out with surgical precision, were the guts of countless clocks. Gears, springs, pendulums, and tiny screws were arranged in neat, obsessive rows. In the center of the desk sat a single, completed mantel clock. It was beautiful, made of a dark, polished wood. The face was porcelain, the numerals painted in an elegant, spidery hand. Behind the glass, the pendulum was still. "It's like he just got up and walked away," Leo murmured, filming the scene. "Or like he's still here," Maya said, hugging herself. "Leo, I heard something," after I played the music box. "Probably just the house," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. He'd heard the groan, too. He reached for the mantel clock. "I wonder if it still works." "Don't!" Maya's warning was sharp, but it was too late. His fingers found the key set into the back of the clock. He turned it, once, twice, 3 times. He let go. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a soft, internal click, the pendulum began to swing. A deep, resonant tick-tock. Tick-tock filled the silent study, a sound so measured and perfect it was unnerving. It was the heartbeat of the house, and the house woke up. A door upstairs slammed shut. Not the wind, there was no wind. The sound was violent, final. Then another, and another. A rapid succession of slams moving down the hallway towards the stairs, like someone was running, shutting doors behind them. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The temperature in the study plummeted. Their breath fogged in the beam of the flashlight. The tick-tock grew louder, seeming to come from everywhere at once, vibrating in their bones. "We need to go." "Now," Maya said, her voice a strangled whisper. Leo, for the first time, felt real fear. A cold trickled down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. He nodded, grabbing his camera. They backed out of the study into the hallway. The hallway was different. The portraits on the walls, the faces were clearer now. Their eyes were wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. The air grew thick with the smell of smoke, and underneath it, the cloying scent of roses. From the top of the grand staircase, a small figure appeared. It was a shadow, a silhouette of a little boy no more than 5 years old. He stood perfectly still, holding something in his hands. Then, he raised one arm and pointed down the stairs, directly at them. A high, reedy voice, the voice of a child, but thin and stretched like worn tape, echoed down to them. "You shouldn't have wound the clock." The shadow boy dropped what he was holding. It was a toy ball. It hit the top step with a dull thud and then began to bounce down the stairs, towards them. Thump, thump, thump! Each bounce was perfectly timed. A grotesque counter-rhythm to the relentless tick-tock of the clock. They ran. Not towards the front door, that was past the stairs, towards the thing, but back down the hallway, deeper into the belly of the house. The floorboards screamed beneath them, the sound morphing into a cacophony of wails and sobs. The walls seemed to press in, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal not plaster, but charred and blackened wood underneath. They burst into the kitchen. This room was a nightmare of a different kind. It was pristine, untouched by time. A single place was set at the table. A pot sat on the cold stove, and the smell of roses was so overpowering it made them gag. A woman's voice, humming that same lullaby, seemed to come from the corner of the room. There was no one there. A door stood ajar on the other side of the kitchen. Stone steps led down into utter blackness. The basement. Elias's workshop. No way, Leo breathed. No way in hell. From the hallway behind them, the bouncing ball. Thump. Thump, thump. It was getting closer. They had no choice. They plunged downward into the darkness. The basement was a cathedral of madness. Workbenches were covered in the same meticulously organized clock parts as the study. But here, the designs were larger, more complex, and utterly insane. Gears the size of dinner plates were connected to pendulums that swung in impossible, jarring rhythms. Cuckoo clocks hung from the low ceiling, their little doors snapping open and shut to reveal tiny, carved birds with human eyes that followed their every move. And in the center of it all, sitting on a stool with his back to them, was a man. He was gaunt, his shirt hanging off his bony frame. He was hunched over a workbench, his hands moving with frantic, precise energy. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock! The sound was deafening down here, a maddening symphony of 1,000 out-of-sync clocks. The man stopped working. His hands went still. Slowly, with a sound like grinding gears, he began to turn on his stool. They didn't wait to see his face. Maya spotted an old coal chute on the far wall. She grabbed Leo's arm and pulled him towards it. He stumbled, his camera flying from his hands and clattering across the concrete floor, its light spinning wildly, illuminating the twisted, screaming face of Elias Miller for a single, horrifying second before the screen went black. They scrambled up the coal chute, tearing their clothes on the rusted metal, bursting out into the overgrown backyard. They didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, collapsing on the sidewalk under the safe, sane glow of a streetlight. The police found them there, babbling and hysterical. They were dismissed, of course. Kids, teenagers, a stupid dare, the old Miller place. The police chief, whose own grandfather had known Elias, just shook his head and told them to go home and get some sleep. Leo never went back for his camera. He deleted his channel that very night. The sound of ticking clocks made him physically ill. He moved to a new city and got a job in an open-plan office with digital. Silent clocks on the wall. Maya stayed. She couldn't leave. She felt tethered to the place, as if a piece of that house's silence had taken root inside her. She would often find herself walking down Cypress Lane at dusk, stopping a safe distance away from the property line. And sometimes, just as the last light of day bled from the sky, she would see it. In the 3rd-story circular window, the cyclops eye of the house, a faint soft light would flicker on, and silhouetted against it, clear as day, were 2 figures. A tall, thin man and the small shape of a child, standing together, watching the world outside, waiting for the silence to be broken again, waiting for someone else to wind the clock. The town tried to forget. They always did. The incident with the 2 kids from out of town became just another footnote, another whispered reason to avoid the Miller place. But the house itself seemed different after that night. It was subtle. A change you couldn't quite put your finger on unless you were looking for it. Unless you were someone like Maya. The air around it felt heavier, the silence more profound, as if the house was holding its breath, satisfied for now but perpetually hungry. The shadow that it cast on Cypress Lane seemed to stretch a little further, leeching the warmth from the sun a few minutes earlier each evening. People found themselves taking the long way home without quite knowing why, a low-level anxiety humming in their veins whenever they glanced down that street. For Maya, the memory was a splinter in her mind, festering. She couldn't let it go. The rational part of her, the history student who dealt in dates and documents, screamed that it was mass hysteria, a shared panic attack, fueled by a creepy atmosphere and a local legend they'd both internalized. But her gut, the primal part of her that had felt the cold and heard the voice, knew better. She started spending her days in the town's historical society, a dusty single-room annex attached to the library. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, just something to prove she wasn't crazy. The official records were useless. A line in a census log, a death certificate for Samuel Miller, cause smoke inhalation. Another for Eleanor, cause drowning. One for Elias, cause heart failure. A property deed that had long since lapsed into a legal gray. Area no one wanted to untangle. The newspaper archives from the time of the fire were more revealing. Not in their facts, but in their tone. The articles were strangely muted. cautious. They reported the tragedy but offered no follow-up. No heartfelt editorials about town grief. It was as if the editors themselves were afraid to look too closely. It was in a box of unsorted donations, a moldering crate of ledgers and personal diaries, from the estate of the town's former postmaster that she found it. A small leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and brown. It wasn't written by Elias or Eleanor, but by the postmaster's wife, a woman named Agnes Pettigrew. Her entries were the mundane chronicles of small-town life, quilting bees, church socials, the price of flour. But her entries from the months following the fire were different. October 12th. Saw Elias Miller in the square today. He looked straight through me. Bought only clock oil and a single candle. They say he still sets a place for her at dinner. The house is so quiet. You can hear the ticking from the street. November 3rd. A bad business. Young Tommy Higgins said he dared to peek in a window of the Miller house. Said he saw old Elias talking to the empty chair. Telling it about his work, said the chair, answered him. In a voice like grinding glass. The boy hasn't spoken a word since. Doctor says it's shock. I wonder. November 28th. The noises from the house have changed. It's not just the ticking anymore. Sometimes it sounds like a child crying. Other times like a woman singing. But the singing is wrong. The notes are all off. It makes the dogs howl. No one goes down Cypress Lane after dark now. Maya's hands trembled as she held the journal. Here it was in faded brown ink. Proof. Not of ghosts, but of the pattern. The house had been doing this for a century, luring people in, feeding on their intrusion, pulling them into its frozen, repeating tragedy. She and Leo hadn't been special. They were just the latest audience for a play that never ended. She closed the journal, her mind racing. She had to tell someone. But who? The police chief would just pat her on the head. Leo had changed his number and vanished from social media. She was alone with this knowledge. That night she dreamed of the house. She was standing in the parlor, but it was clean and bright, filled with sunlight and the smell of fresh-baked bread. A woman with kind eyes and an apron, Eleanor, smiled at her from the hallway, holding a basket of roses. A little boy, Samuel, laughed and ran past her, his toy ball bouncing. It was idyllic, peaceful. Then the smell of roses turned cloying, suffocating. The sunlight dimmed, yellowing to the color of old bone. Eleanor's smile didn't change, but her eyes became desperate, pleading. She pointed behind Maya. Maya turned. Elias stood there. Not a gaunt specter, but a proud, handsome man holding a beautiful mantel clock. He held it out to her. "It's for you," he said, his voice warm. "It keeps the perfect time. It keeps all the time we have left." He opened the glass face of the clock. Instead of a pendulum, there was a tiny, swirling vortex of darkness inside. A deafening tick-tock exploded in her ears, and she was sucked forward into the clock, into the freezing, airless dark. She woke up gasping, the sound of ticking still echoing in her skull. It was coming from her bedroom. Tick-tock, tick-tock, her heart seized. She fumbled for the lamp, her fingers slick with sweat. The light clicked on. It was her own cheap, battery-operated alarm clock on the nightstand, its digital display cheerfully reading 3:17 a.m. She stared at it, her breath coming in ragged gulps. It had never made a ticking sound before. She picked it up. It was silent now, just a smooth plastic rectangle. She threw it across the room where it hit the wall and shattered. She couldn't stay in her apartment. She pulled on a jacket and boots, her body moving on autopilot. She had to see it. She had to look at the house to prove to herself it was just a house. The walk to Cypress Lane was a blur. The town was asleep, shrouded in a fine, cold mist. The streetlights were haloed, their light not penetrating, just illuminating the fog itself. As she turned onto the lane, she saw it. A faint, warm light was on in the ground floor window, the parlor window. Her feet carried her forward against every screaming instinct. She crept across the brittle, overgrown lawn, her boots crunching on dead grass. She peered through the grimy window pane.